it's 10 o'clock on my screen. It is 10 o'clock on my screen. That means I think we are now live. Hello, welcome. Welcome to this lovely, well, very rainy in the UK where I am, morning, Sunday morning. We are here this morning. I'm here from the Limitless podcast. I'm Alex O'Neill and I host a podcast called Limitless, which is supporting change makers, particularly those who are wanting to make change in the education space. And I am here on behalf of Progressive Education today to interview the wonderful Peter Hartkamp, who we will meet very shortly. But firstly, why are we here today? So we want to celebrate today Youth Rights Day, which is an idea started, a campaign started to advocate for the social, educational and the environmental rights of young people. So this is a way to start that conversation, to just highlight the needs of and the rights of our young people in all countries across the world. It also ties in really closely with World Children's Day, which is a campaign organised by UNICEF, which is a global day of action for children, and which is by children as well. And it marks the adoption of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which UNICEF created, I think, on this day a number of years ago. So here we are today. This is what we're celebrating, and we've invited along Peter Hartkamp, who is a big advocate of children's rights. And I've got a few questions to ask him today about his background. He's set up a school, a number of schools actually in the Netherlands over the years. And he's also written a book called Beyond Coercive Education, a plea for the realisation of the rights of the child in education. He's also a TEDx speaker and has lots of thoughts and opinions about what children's rights look like in education in all countries across the world. So before we launch into the questions, as with the other live interviews that we've done in the Progressive Education group, I will be asking a few questions to Peter, but we'd love your input as well. So if you have any questions you'd like to ask throughout the interview, make sure you pop them in the comments, and I will try to get to as many questions as I can throughout the progress of the interview. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome you, Peter. Hello, Peter. Welcome to Progressive Education.
Thank you very much.
So tell me a little bit about how you first came to be such an advocate for children's rights and build your schools in the Netherlands.
Well, it all started more than 20 years ago. We have 3 daughters, and the oldest one, when she was 8, she said, "I'd rather be dead than at school." And that was basically for his parents like a big wake-up call. And then we said, okay, well, this is not normal. The purpose of schools can't be like this. What's happening at the school? And at the time, I was working as a business consultant. And then I started looking at the school in the same way as I look at businesses. And normally, when you go to a customer and you ask around and you talk to people, within a day or two, you know what the problems are. And you can actually think about how to solve problems. And when I started looking at education and the schools she was in, the more questions I asked, the more questions I got. And I said, "What's happening here? I don't understand this. How is this? What's happening here?" And then basically we took us with my wife together almost about 2 years, like an incredible amount of reading and talking to people to understand that there is no clear logic behind the whole education system. It's all because of history. And then we understood that, and then we said, okay, but we don't want to expose our children to these schools. But that's like 99% of all schools in the Netherlands and for the world, for that matter. So then we said, okay, well, it's easy to know what you don't want, but what do we want? And then we had a very long route around looking at how do you call it? Child-centered education, motivational theories, all sorts of things. And all the forms we saw, it was still the adult determining what's good for a child. But I said, you still can't look into the brains of people. So the only person who can actually decide what's good for the person is the person itself. And then we came across the Sudbury Valley School, their website. And I can still remember looking at the website for the first time, and I said, "No, this is ridiculous. This can't be." Students like deciding everything for themselves and even being involved in the management of the school. No, can't be. And then a few weeks later, we looked at the website again, and then we ordered some books and we started reading the books, and then that really blew me away. I said, "Well, this is something I totally believe in, and this is really what I want." So then the only challenge was to start a school. So that's what we did basically. And starting a school, although it's pretty hard and you have to do a lot of things, that was relatively easy. But what's really difficult was the opinions of other people. If you change something to children, how you educate your children, people have very strong opinions about why that's not right. And that was the biggest problem in terms of the response of the government, where the school inspectorate, but also members in parliament, people at the ministry, they were really upset about parents trying something new, and they went in full force almost. And it took the bureaucracy like a few years to do that. But then they really clamped down on the school. And then it got really because the school was working so good for our children. And then as a parent, we got criminally prosecuted here in the Netherlands.
Wow.
And it got very, very got very angry, but also from what's happening here, how is things going? Because the freedom of education is in the Dutch constitution. And I said, well, if it's in the constitution, how come they are reacting like this? And then we start, because by training I'm a mining engineer, but I start looking into law. And this area of the law nobody has specialized in, so basically we have to do it ourselves. And we found out that basically the government was not sticking to the law at all. And their own ideas about what good education is were much stronger than the laws of the country, which to me was so ridiculous. So we went to the courts to save the school, basically. And that was both administrative courts, criminal courts. We filed official complaints. We went to the European Court of Human Rights twice, and that took 7 years all in all, in which the school worked very well for the students, but for the parents it was very, very hard, because the Compulsory Education Act is aimed at parents, and as a parent you can go to jail here in the Netherlands for that, and you can actually lose parental custody. So it's pretty serious stuff. So after 7 years, then we had to close the school. Because if you would continue, you actually would get higher fines, and the punishment would get more severe. And then we said, okay, with my wife, well, enough is enough. Our children are grown up, the adults. We tried it twice now, it didn't work. So enough is enough. But then one of the parents who worked in education, special needs education, said, this is so important, we need to continue this. And he said, well, if you really want, we can do it. So we said we developed a different strategy towards the school inspectorate. Then we started 6 months later, we started the third school, also a Sudbury school. And then they accepted everything and everything was fine. So now it's possible to do that. But it took a lot of very hard work, and we spent all those years like really exploring the laws and understand what was happening.
That's so much dedication that you must have had over all of those years, especially in the face of, as you say, like all of the criminal accusations to you and to the other parents as well, did you say? So any of the parents that sent their children to the school?
Yeah, all parents.
Wow, that's amazing. So, I assume having your own children at the school was something that really kept you, motivated to try and make it work. What was it like being in that community where, as you say, like it worked great for the kids, but you just had this constant sort of pressure on you?
Well, Well, it was really hard, um, both
Mm,
in time and energy. All the criticism from the outside world, but also emotionally and also financially, because those court cases cost a lot of money.
yeah.
But then seeing how the children were doing, how they were developing, how they were thriving, that gave so much energy. That's what it all kept going.
Mm. And what difference did you see in your daughter from
Well, it's
saying
three
she'd
daughters.
rather be dead
Well, we
than go
see
to school?
they're um, they basically, yeah, but how do you say it? They're resilient. They know what they want. They know if they want to do something, they have to do it themselves. So they developed in really like well-rounded adults,
Mm,
without any school traumas. She always
yeah,
saying that, but it was very nice.
yeah. How wonderful. So 2 failed schools, but then 1 that is surviving. Is it still around now?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So how is that school making a difference to the community at the moment?
Well, we get a lot of the students coming to our school, are either like very young students, like the school is from 4 to 18.
Mhm,
And the young students are coming there because the parents are really thinking about the educational system and they don't want to expose their children there. A lot of the older students already have like a horrible school experiences and school traumas.
mm,
And they basically the first months or even longer they need to recover from all the damage from the school before they can actually start to do things they want to do.
mm. What does that recovery look like in the school?
Um, well, we don't provide therapy. It's not a
Mm,
therapeutic institute; it's a school. But I think the key, the most important thing of the school is that we treat children with full respect, and we
mm,
treat children like you want to be treated yourself, and that alone makes a big difference. Because then, for them, the school becomes a very safe place where they understand they can do the things they want to do. They can relate to all the other students and to the adults in the school, and that gives them confidence again. And once
mm.
it starts, they start developing at a phenomenal speed.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I actually recognised a similar thing. I went to visit Summerhill School in the UK a number of years ago, and it was a similar sort of thing where I was blown away by the maturity and the confidence of the children, like even from very young age. And I think that's something it just seems to be an invisible thing which happens in schools, which we just don't recognise. Um, and yeah, it's really interesting how having that freedom allows kids to grow in that way. Do you feel like the school? So, what's your school called now?
Sudbury School, Amersfoort.
Oh, it is a Sudbury school,
Amersfoort is the like the
Amersfoort.
city in the center of the Netherlands.
Ah, cool. Okay. Um, and do you feel like the school you set up, is that having any ripple effect in the rest of the Netherlands? Do you think?
Well, it's difficult to say, but I think it's much more than we know.
Yeah.
Because basically, because we have the school, we challenge all the common thinking about schools and education, and that has a far-reaching effect.
Mm.
Like yesterday, we had an open day at the school, and we met a mother with two sons, and she went to a lecture we gave like 5 years ago on a baby fair.
Oh.
And it really made her think, and that was the reason she came to us now. And I sometimes have like I also give lectures. Like I give a lecture like in 2003, and
Mm.
I came across the same person like 15 years later, and she said, "Well, the lecture you gave like changed my world."
Wow.
Some people are not open and don't want to talk about it, but there are a number of people really, it can actually change their life in the sense that they are all the common things we know about how schools work, how education works, how children are put totally, well, I would say right side up.
Mm.
And it really, the whole card house of their assumptions and their thinking falls to pieces.
Yeah. Is your Sudbury school the only one of its kind in the Netherlands, would you say? Do you know of any others?
No, at the moment it is. When we had the court cases, we had 3 schools, but then the
Mm.
pressure was so strong, it was very difficult.
Mm.
Basically, what to say to parents who came to the school, well, this is like a fantastic school for your kids. And by the way, if you put your kids here, you get criminally prosecuted.
Yeah.
We managed
Not
to grow
terribly enticing. Yeah.
the school to like 30 students because the parents said, well, children are much more important than what the government wants, so I'll do it anyway. But of course, that's an enormous adverse pressure. And on top of that, of course, in the Netherlands, there's no tradition of private education. Like 99% of the schools are government funded.
Okay.
And because of the funding requirements, it's not possible to have a school model like this funded. So on top of the concept and the different thinking about school, they have to pay for it. So that's we try to
Mm.
keep the cost very low. We charge like 5,000 euros a year now. But still, of course, that's a lot of money.
Mm. Yeah, we have a similar problem in the UK in that if you are going to be a government funded school, you have to basically adhere to everything that the government requires of you when it comes to running a school. Um, so I've had one of our audience members has popped a question in. I'm not sure that you could necessarily answer this completely, Peter, but she said she has a friend of hers and who also has a child who says that they will never go back to school. But she's now at risk of losing her child due to the, I'm assuming, restrictions from the government. Um, they're from Poland, but as a friend, do you have any advice on what she can do to help, or any advice you'd give?
No, that's very difficult. Basically, it's to flee the country and ask for political asylum somewhere else.
Mm.
And it's something when we had all the court cases, we seriously considered that to go to Belgium for ask for political asylum. There are a lot of parents fleeing countries because of school requirements and school laws, and it's horrible. But it's the control of the state about how they want to educate your children, and
Yeah.
it's horrible.
Mm.
So either go under the radar and do what you want to do without people seeing it,
Mm.
or move somewhere else.
Mm.
Like when we started our Sudbury school in 2008, I talked to one of the founders of the Sudbury Valley School, and she said, "Well, why not you move to Boston? That's much easier. You only have
Yeah.
to quit your job, sell your house, move to Boston, and start up again." But she was right. It would have been much easier.
Mm. But you didn't. You stayed. Are you glad that you stayed and
Um,
fought it?
yeah, I think well, we didn't want to give up the Netherlands totally. And we said, well, this is worth fighting for.
Mm.
Was that your first question? You said what's keeping me going? Initially, it was my own children. But when they left the school, we thought about it and said, well, this is so much bigger than my own children. This is the whole
Mm.
education system. If you see the school system we have was initially rolled out in Prussia in this is 1794 for the needs of the Prussian state, and which was very autocratic, and they needed like obedient soldiers and workers
Mm.
and civil servants. And they rolled out on a mass scale a compulsory school system with a state curriculum, state certified teachers, classes, state exams, etc. And in essence, the system, and that's also what I talk about in my book, at the systems level, all the schools are the same.
Mm.
And you can change the colors, you can change the people, you can make things more friendly. But still, there's a state curriculum which has to be force fed into children.
Yeah.
So in terms of we talk a lot about, if you talk about the rise of the child of the United Nations Convention. I think the first thing is respect for children as people. There's nowhere in the UN conventions on human rights is that you only become a person after you're 18. You're a person if you're born, basically.
Yeah.
And I think schools students are forced to go to school, but they're also forced inside the schools to do all sorts of tests and make their homework and follow the lessons. And but this coercion to children, to me, coercion and respect are diametrically opposite. So schools are basically mass factories where we totally disrespect children because what children want doesn't make a bit of difference.
Yeah.
Their needs are not looked at. So it's this coercion is very serious.
Mm. And as you say, I've met some wonderful educators who are trying. They do a fantastic work within the system to try and give children as much choice as possible. But as you say, the underlying system just doesn't sort of give space for that.
No, that most of what you see, the people there's some really wonderful people with really good intentions, but in the end,
Mm.
after if you keep fighting the system, you will be exhausted after a while, and it can be 5 years or 10 or 20.
Mm.
But you can't. It's very difficult to change the system from within the system.
Mm.
Uh,
Interesting.
and also, if you see, like, for instance, if you look at large companies, if they really want to radically innovate, they don't do that within the company. They set up a separate company outside to as a
Mm.
as a ground for innovation and new thinking and those type of things. And then if it really works, then they can incorporate parts of that. But changing the system from within is nearly impossible, I think.
Yeah.
Then in companies, it's relatively, because I used to work for in those days one of the biggest companies in the world, a multinational. And those are very weird, like 150,000 employees in the time. Making changes there, where it's very, very strong hierarchy, very strong bureaucracy. But making changes in a company like that is like probably 10 or 100 times easier than changing the education system.
Hmm. Yes, I can
So it's
imagine
really
that.
so hard. It's so ingrained in people.
Mm. Yeah, for everyone within and outside the education system, I think as well. Actually ties really nicely into another question we've got from Polly, although her name is showing up as Elizabeth, so but I think it's from Polly. Do you ever believe that mainstream schools in the Netherlands could become more democratic? And I'll ask you a follow-up question in a second.
Now, I think it might be possible, but I think it is very, very difficult because it really requires the government to change the school laws. The frame within schools have to work are determined by the government laws, and as long as those laws now change, that's the rigid structure in which you have to operate. And if you don't change the structure, then it will be very, very difficult.
Mm. And do you do any like training for educators in the Netherlands on how you've set up your school and how you run it?
Not specifically training, but we, like on our open days, we get a lot of teachers from traditional education who are
Mm.
curious and want to see what we're doing, or they visit during the school time. Sometimes we give lectures. Uh,
Mm.
but what we see is for the actually, it's very difficult for if you trained as a teacher for the traditional school system. Um, our what we are doing is like totally the opposite. So you have
Mm.
to let go of all your what you learned. You have to unlearn almost everything. You have to forget everything you know about schools, and also change your assumptions.
Mm. I think
Um,
that's true for parents as well, actually. I know I've been through that transition.
yeah, for me as well, because I was also obviously a product of the traditional school system, and I have to really
Mm.
unlearn and see what was happening. And in our case, because our daughter was so totally unhappy about school, because like socially she was really fine, she had lots of friends, was doing very well, but it was the education system itself and the way she was forced to do things and how things worked. So as a parent, you really have to let go. And that's was we have actually we organize at school like evenings, like 4 or 6 times a year, to discuss with parents. Because for them it's much more difficult because they're trained in a regular school. Some students don't
Mm.
tell anything at home. Uh,
Mm.
School, because we respect the privacy of the students. As a school, we don't report anything to parents. Um, so it's really hard sometimes.
Mm. Yeah, hard to manage that relationship.
But on the other hand, parents see their children thriving and being very have a lot of energy, and so they see they're doing really well, and that makes it easy.
Mm.
Sometimes it's this little voice in their head creeps up. Yes, what about? Do they learn this? Do they learn that? And
Yeah,
that's difficult.
yeah. That's a lifetime of being told that that's what you need to do, isn't it? So
Sorry.
that feels like it's because it's a lifetime of being told that that's what you need to do as a child.
Yeah, but I think the one of the things which that's why actually the reason I wrote my book when we lost at the court case at the Council of State, which is the highest administrative court in the Netherlands. The things the judges said were actually contradicting the law. And then I
Really?
questioned myself, how is it possible that these judges are that their own thinking and ideas about what proper education is seems to be
Mm.
stronger than the laws.
Mm.
It's almost that they're blinded by their own convictions about education. Uh,
Yeah.
and that's so very strong. And of course, judges are the people who have been longest in the education system because they went to primary school, secondary school, they went to university, and then there's like I think in the Netherlands, it's a 9-year training to become a judge. So
Mm.
there are the exponents of the system itself. And how can you expect them to think critically about the education system and think about the rights of people challenging the system?
Yeah, that's so true. And I think it's true of, certainly in our country, politicians as well, who are making decisions on, they've same thing. They've been through a very, very, coercive education their whole life. Very tricky. What's different,
No, but
would
also
you?
the people in in parliament and in power and the elites, they are successful thanks to the system.
Mm, yeah.
So for them to challenge the system is very difficult because they have to challenge themselves, and that makes it very difficult.
Mm, yeah. So what do you feel is different about your Sudbury school now? Because you said, you work differently with the inspectors. So what do you feel like you're safe with your school now, like that it's not going to get closed down, or do you feel like you're still battling the system?
Now we found a way to work with the inspectors, and basically what we did, like initially we said, okay, this is our school, you can look at it, do what you need to do, and we were very transparent and open. And for the inspectors, it was very difficult because there's nothing what they knew about schools they could see in our school. There was nothing they understood what we were doing. So when we went for the second time, we spent a lot of time and effort in terms of what do the inspectors need to do their jobs properly.
Mhm.
And can we give them the right information? And also, can we give them put everything in the right language?
Mm.
Because we've got this education speak, and that's what they want to hear. And if you don't speak that, then they don't understand it. So you need to we literally asked them, what do you need? And then they said, basically what they said was, well, we're bureaucrats, we need documents. And then we said, okay, well, we have a Sudbury school, we're very good at writing documents, so we wrote a lot of documents.
Yeah.
So we wrote like a document, our pedagogical vision, which is now like 100-page document, where we went from
Wow.
the learning theories everybody knows to the practice of our school. So really in their language, so for them to really understand what was happening and why we were doing things. And that helped them a lot, because that's also because if they have the documents and they got critical questions from the Inspector General or from people in Parliament, they know they got all the documents and they got all the information they need, so they never come to us to ask for more.
Mm. And as you sort of alluded to before, you're not actually breaking the law. So I suppose it's about them being able to demonstrate that you're not breaking the law in that sense.
Yeah, and also the
Mm.
education laws, they're all, don't know how it's in England, but they're all pretty vague.
Mm.
They're not like hard norms. Like if you have in the construction industry, you got like a hard norm. You need to be so strong, or this size, or this tolerance. But in education, it's all pretty vague. So it's very difficult to actually to prove you're not adhering to a law, because the law is not clear in itself.
Mm. Yeah. Always makes it far far harder to fight it, I think. So I've got a couple of questions and comments coming in, which is very interesting. Let's have a look. So someone has said, if judges, lawyers, and politicians are biased against freedom and democracy in education, isn't a massive school strike a solution? So children hate school, parents see the suffering, teachers are unhappy. Could we think of such a strike, i.e., could even expand across the entire European Union? What's your thoughts?
My answer would be yes, probably, but then you have to do it all. And that's, I think, the kind of the difficulty we had in the Netherlands was an example. It's like a number of years ago. I think it was like 2014 or 15.
Mm.
Then there was a whole thing about that the government wanted the schools to give so many hours of lessons, and schools were complying, but sometimes there were not enough teachers, so they put all the students in a big room to work for
Mm.
themselves. So they were almost like forced to sit somewhere and do nothing. And then the students started to protest, and there were major protest manifestations, and even got violent. And they sent
Mm.
how do you call it? The riot police in, and things like that. Uh,
Wow.
and it had no effect whatsoever. Uh, so you have to be, if you organize it, and like a lot of the students, they're so in school, they're so almost like brainwashed that they think that they start to believe that what they're doing is good for them.
Mm.
So to get like 100% support for school strikes, it's probably very difficult to achieve.
Very difficult. Mm. Yeah, that's interesting. Actually, that's really interesting. I've seen that as well, where you get so ingrained in how things are working that you kind of just accept it as the norm. Um, so yeah, it's yeah, I can see how that'd be very tricky.
Yeah, and also if you look at the norm, what the norm is basically what's normal,
Mm.
and if everybody does it, then it's normal.
Yeah,
So although it might not be normal, it's the
yeah,
norm. So that
yeah,
makes it more difficult.
yeah. That's very interesting. Um, Someone's made a comment which I think is really interesting, and it'd be great to hear your view on this actually, because you'll have seen this with your schools that you set up. Is part of the problem about setting up children's rights-based schools and communities is that they're going to have different outcomes to traditional coercive schooling. So, do we need a wider view of what successful looks like at the end of an education, or not that it ever ends really, but the children's education? What have you seen with the children that have gone through your schools?
Um, Yeah, I think this the whole thing of success is kind of difficult because can you, as a community or a country, even determine what's success for individual students,
Mm,
or is success in the end success for the individual person? So who determines what successful is?
mm,
Are high wages success, or high follow up education success, or good jobs success, or like a meaningful, fulfilling life, or being productive part of the community, or so that's kind of very difficult. Uh,
mm,
what we see in terms of what students do after our school, it's very like a very wide range. Some decide not to go for further education or not go to university and start for themselves, or um, take small jobs to prepare for something else. Some others go to university and do the same things as other students do.
mm,
So it's a very wide range of everything. But I think in the
mm,
end, what we see with all the students, they are successful in terms of to achieve their own goals. They're socially very what do you call it? Developed in the sense that it's very easy for them to relate to other people. They understand how things work. They can work in like a very creative environments, but also in very strong hierarchies.
mm,
Um, like one of our daughters is she went to an like as a trajectory, like the schools and the traditional schools, the like having an end diploma and doing exams is the purpose of the school.
mm,
And diplomas, there's nothing wrong with diplomas as long as you don't force it upon to people. But for me, diploma, unless you want to have the diploma for the purpose of having the diploma, it's a means to do some to go to a next step.
mm,
If you want to go to university, a diploma can be very useful. If you want to go become a plumber, there's many other ways you can do it. You don't need a diploma for that. Um, but for instance, our one of our daughters went to the. She wants to go to an art academy
mm.
for which you need a diploma, or you can do an entry test. So she chose to do an entry test, and it took her like a day and a half preparation. The preparation for a diploma is 5 years of school.
Yeah.
So what is basically what do you want?
Yeah.
Um,
It's
and
so
now she
funny.
works. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say it's just so funny how that root is so ingrained into us.
Yeah, so that's the basically you have to ask yourself the questions: why are we doing it? What's the purpose?
Mm,
And is there other ways to achieve the same, which are much easier? Like for instance, if you take like simple things in school, like learning to read, schools put a lot of pressure on children, or at least here in the Netherlands, to learn to read because being able to read is a precondition for all the other things in the school. If you can't
yeah.
read, you can't do arithmetic, you can't do history, you can't do nothing basically. Um, at our school, reading is one of the things you will learn anyway.
Mm,
But if you can't read, you can still do all the other things just by talking to people, and it's happening a lot. So it doesn't really matter where you learn to read when you're 4 or when you're 14.
yeah.
But what we see at our school is that once children they decided to want to learn to read because they think it's important and they want to be dependent on other people uh, to ask everything. They learn to read like in a week or 2 weeks,
Mm,
and the things can go so easy. And the same with arithmetic. We had like one of the was before we started with the schools. Our daughter was at a school where she had relatively freedom to decide when to do things. So
mm,
she she still had to do all the things, but she could decide when to do things or not to do things. And at one time, she was very good at not doing what the teacher wanted her to do. So she was like half a math book behind, and it was like 4 weeks before the summer holidays. So she came home with the book, and then I thought it was still important. So I sat down with her, not helping her with math, but making sure there were no breaks between the sums she did.
mm,
At school, she would do like half a page of sums in an hour, and I was sitting next to her. She did like 20 pages in an hour. So an hour and a half, she finished the whole book without any mistakes, basically.
Yeah.
And then I thought about, well, this is not about math or calculating. She's very good at it, um, uh, her problem is that the way the school is offering it, because there's a lot of repetition, and she was like more like a conceptual thinker. And if
Mm.
she understood something, it was done for her.
Yeah.
So all the repetition was killing her. Other students really like it and they want to repeat and repeat and repeat, and that's totally fine. But it is, what's your learning style? How do you learn things? And for her, she understood it, and that was it.
Mm.
Like the whole primary school math, you can learn in, like we've seen an example at the Sudbury Valley School. You can learn it in like 20 hours.
Yeah.
And at the school of my children, they spent like in 6 years, like 1,200 hours on math.
Yeah.
If you can do it 60 times faster, you have so much time for doing other things.
Yeah, that's so interesting, isn't it? This view of like, well, you must spend so many hours a week on maths and English. Well, for us, English and writing, reading, that kind of thing. Like, but why? It's so interesting.
Yeah, but
Um,
the why question is very important.
yeah,
But
yeah.
also, like for other things, like I went to traditional school, and I was always, I was really like math and physics was very easy for me, because once you understand it, you don't need to learn anything. But I was always struggling with languages, because you have to learn things out of the top of your head, and you have to learn words. And I always try to not learn anything and just to understand everything. But with languages, it just doesn't work. So I skipped all the languages, but of course English was obligatory. So I kept struggling on with English, and basically the impression I got at school was that I was not very good at English. Then I
Mm.
started working for an Anglo-Dutch company, and then at a certain moment, my English colleagues came to me to ask me for how to write things in English. I said, what's happening here? Oh, maybe it's not so bad after all. Um, but then when I look at my daughter, she learned English in the way she learned Dutch, in a very natural way, by reading Harry Potter books in English, basically.
Mm.
When she's in England, she speaks British English, and when she's in the States, she speaks American English. Her proficiency of English is so much greater than mine.
Mm.
Um, so, well, it will happen anyway if there's a need for it. If you want to do it, we see it at school as well. We have most of the 5-year-olds speak English at our school without any lesson whatsoever,
Yeah,
by
interesting.
playing Minecraft and talking to visitors, and
Yeah.
it's all coming in a very natural way.
They've learnt it, but they haven't been taught it, which is the key thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I'm interested to know, because I know that there are people in the audience in progressive education who are looking to set up their own schools. So if you could distill down one piece of advice for someone who's interested in doing that, what would it be?
Um, I think you need to be very clear and articulate about the school concept, and
Mm.
really understand it. And I think if you start a school, you have to do it with a group. It's almost impossible to do it alone.
Mhm.
So with this whole group, you need to have a very clear vision about, this is how the school will look like. This is what we think important. This is how we organize things. Um, like when we started our Sudbury school, after the first school failed, we prepared a 9-page vision document. We discussed like every word
Mhm.
to understand what we really wanted to do. Because if you don't, that's the basis of your school, and all the rest is like relatively easy. Well, it's
Mhm.
very hard, but it's not as hard as getting a vision clear.
Mm. Yeah, it makes
Because,
everything else easier, kind of thing, when you've got that
yeah,
vision. Yeah.
and I think the other thing is, and that came across that all the discussions on education. The question is, what's your base assumption? How do you view children? And
Mm.
schools are treating children like are humans to be, or humans which are developing. Um, and our vision is of children that they're full-fledged human beings.
Mm.
We treat them as human beings with all the respect which you give to human beings. And that assumption that's the start of everything. And if you talk about education to people and you don't get clear where they come from, you might as well talk Chinese to them, because then the whole discussion is totally meaningless. And that's another thing when in my work as a consultant, always when we help companies with like contract strategies for large projects, the first thing we do is, what are the assumptions?
Mm.
And that governs how people think. And if you don't get that clear and make that very explicit, then later on it will catch you somewhere.
Mm. So it's making those assumptions really clear. That's very interesting. Would you say that what you said just there about seeing children as fully fledged humans is sort of an underpinning value of your Sudbury school?
Well, I think it's the most important one.
Mm.
It's the start point. Because if you see children as human beings, then you start and you treat them as human beings, then and the rest follows from it.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting. Um, so another thing kind of cropped up when we were talking about that, which is there any, I don't know how to word this question very well, but when we're talking about children's rights and seeing children as fully fledged humans, there's certain things that spring to mind, and obviously in the sense of education, we're talking about giving them choice as to whether they want to be there or not, as well as giving them choice as to what they learn and how they learn and that kind of thing. Would you say there's anything that is just so ingrained that we often don't spot it as something which you feel is a contravention of children's rights?
Sorry, how do you don't totally understand your question? What do you mean?
I suppose it's just that, is there anything that's you see that is, even these parents that come to you with their children to Sudbury Valley and say, or sorry, your Sudbury school, and say, my child needs something different. Is there something common that you see that they overlook or they don't see in terms of how they are going against the rights of their children?
Not sure. I think for parents it's a struggle, because they also have to let go all their assumptions and things at home. Of course, when you're living in a family, is different than at school.
Mm,
We have also been struggling because both my wife and I worked at the school staff, and also our students were there.
mm,
And we made a strong effort to separate school life and home life. And some things as a parent, which our children did, which I would totally disapprove of, when they did it at school, I say, okay, this is school, leave it. So we didn't talk about it at home.
mm,
And but sometimes you see for young, like, one of the things you see for responsive parents is if their students did something at school which was like totally not allowed and totally against the rules. um,
yeah.
and they get and sometimes the students get like suspended for that for a day.
Mm,
And the parents start saying, so yes, but she's so young and she can't oversee it. Um,
mm,
and then they're taking away responsibility from their child. And it's about but leaving the responsibility totally with your child and with school, with the students. And it's sometimes very hard because it's so contradicting all the things we've learned. Um,
mm,
but even like sometimes with like a 4-year-old which didn't we have two things at school which are obligatory to do, and one is that we have like a cleaning roster where everybody cleans part of the school.
mhm,
We don't have a cleaning service. And the other thing is we have like a weekly school meeting, and we have a daily uh, judicial committee to look at when people breach the rules of the school.
mhm,
Um, and she didn't do her, like a 4-year-old didn't do her cleaning duties on purpose. And then we suspended her for a day to go home and say, well, think about this is the school, this is how it works, these are the rules. Think about how you want to operate at school, because what you're doing now, you can't do that. And the first reaction was, well, yes, but she's only 4. And then later they found out that the 4-year-old was knowing exactly what she was doing, and she was really trying to circumvent the whole system and choice. So now leave the responsibility with the students. And of course, the school is like a safe place, and if there's physical danger, we always take care of that, of course. But for the other things, is leaving responsibility with the child. That's sometimes really a challenge.
Yeah.
And also, went a few years ago with my youngest daughter. She was 26 then, to give a series of presentations about the school, where I could tell from the school how the school worked, and she could tell of her own experience. So, having done Art Academy and a master's afterwards, and then somebody asked, "Well, what's the best thing about the school?" And she said, "The best thing about the school is that you can really decide for yourself how you do things." And then, like half an hour later, somebody else asked, "Well, what's the most difficult thing of the school?" And she said, "Well, the most difficult thing of the school is that you really have to do it yourself."
Yes.
Because
So
it's
every
also very,
choice you make is your responsibility.
yeah,
Yeah, that's so
yeah, yeah. And
interesting.
you don't have to do it alone. You can get all help you want, but in the
Yeah.
essence, you have to start for yourself.
Do you know what? That's actually, it's one of the things that I've been noticing about some of the young people I know who are coming out of the other end of the education system. So they're like 18, maybe the other side, maybe university. And actually, through school, they kind of done okay because they've understood that system and they know what they're doing. Once they hit the real world, for want of a better word, or they're having to, as you say, make their own choices, make their own decisions, take responsibility for their life, that's when they break down because they just don't know how to do it because they've never had to. Well, that's my assumption anyway. And they really struggle. So
No,
it's
but it's
very
happening because, but if you look at it from a system perspective, if
mm,
you force children to school until they're 16 or 17 or 18, depends a bit per country, and basically what they learn there is to do what other people tell them to do.
mm,
So they're basically just not responsible for their own behavior, or they are
yeah,
responsible to actually execute the things they are told to do.
yeah,
And that's one definition of responsibility. Our definition of responsibility, which is like diametrically opposite, is you are responsible for your own choices and your own behavior and the consequences of that.
mm,
But then we said to students, okay, now you're out of school or out of university, and now you're a responsible adult, and you can do it.
yeah,
And you've never learned to do it.
yeah,
That's also one of the premises of our school. That basically the idea is that you learn to take responsibility by being responsible.
yeah, which makes sense, right? Yeah.
Well, to us it makes sense. I think to a lot of other people it doesn't make sense because it's not happening.
Mm,
Same thing like also there's a lot of think about how children are, and people think, well, children can't do that. But and also
yeah.
all the educational research on children is all done on children who are in the regular school system.
Mm,
So the
yes.
research says a lot about children in the regular school system, but the context is never mentioned.
Yeah.
Like this is a student, 8-year-old, going to a prison school, and how do they behave in prison?
Yeah.
Um, but it's not how children are; it's how children are in that context.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
in our context, children are totally different, so they behave different and do different. Like once we had was a professor from Leiden University visiting our school, um, and she walked through the school, and it was only an hour and a half, but she could have talked for like 24 hours about it. And at a certain moment, she said, was very interesting. She said, according to literature, 6-year-old kids cannot plan for themselves.
Mm,
And here I see it everywhere. And
Yeah.
the reason is, why can't 6-year-olds in school not plan? Because they're never everything is planned for them, so they
Mm.
don't need to be able to plan, so they don't learn it. At our school, if you're not doing anything, nothing is happening. So you must start to plan, otherwise
Yeah.
nothing will happen. Um, so children can't. We don't have a proper perspective of children, because our perspective is totally determined by children going to school.
Mm.
And if you look, I also put it in my book. If you look at back in history, sometimes you see. I think during the, what was it, the British-American War of 1803.
Mm.
Was it like a British navy ship was captured by the Americans, and they put one of their people on the British ship to sail to a port. The person in charge was, I think, only 11 or 12 years old,
Oh, wow.
and he later became an admiral. So he
Mm.
probably was very smart and very good. But now, of course, you cannot imagine an 11-year-old commanding a
No.
warship. So are children incompetent because they are incompetent, and that's where we need to guide them and steer them and encourage them? Or don't we give children any opportunities anymore to show that they are capable? And because of that, we say we need to more steer them and guide them. And
Mm.
uh, so we see, like at our school, we see amazing things happening with children who are so capable.
Mm.
But if you're not allowed to show that, or if you not have the opportunity to show that, then people think that you can't do it, and then they start telling you what to do because you can't do it.
Yeah.
So
And that's,
from yeah,
no, go on. Yeah, I was just going to say, like, as a parent, I can see this, and I'm sure as a teacher, it's the same. Again, that's how we were taught. So to then step back from that, it's a very, like, as you said earlier in the interview, you have to unlearn everything you've learnt about how you learn things and how you pick things up and how you develop,
yeah,
and take a step back from that and go, oh, hang on, I need to not step in and help my child here, and that's the best way for them to learn.
yeah, and that can also be very confronting, because it's also, yeah, your securities, and that's how things work. If
Mm.
you start to challenge them, then they might fall apart, and then there's nothing left. Like before, when we were still really thinking about what to do in terms of what kind of school and what would be right, I start to, like, we had 3 daughters, and the oldest was 8 or 9, and the twins are a year and a half younger, and they're
Mm.
all pretty strong-minded and vocal. And I start to ask myself, as a parent, with everything I said to my children, I ask myself the question, why am I saying this?
Mm.
I found out
Yes.
for 75% of the things I was saying, I couldn't find any reasons.
Yeah. Yeah.
And only the others, then that's how my parents treated me, or that's what I learned at school. And I said, well, if I can't explain why I'm saying something, then I should stop saying it.
Hmm.
And that's a very tiring process, and it took me more than half a year. But I got rid of like 75% of all things, and I got a small set of like 25% for which I could point out the reasons.
Mm.
But for those things, I never had to point out the reasons, because they understood, and it was never a problem.
Mm.
So you really have to challenge yourself as well in every aspect, in terms of why are you doing things. Uh,
Mm.
and it's
And
also, as working at the school as a staff member, all the staff meetings goes about this. What are you doing as a staff? And is it your own assumption, or are you taking the child
yeah.
seriously, or what are you doing?
So it's yeah, you're constantly questioning yourself all the time. I definitely find that with my daughter as well. I've done that over the years, where I've kind of, told her to do something or told her not to do something, and then she's quite she has very strong opinions, so she often tells me what she thinks of what I've said, and I do have to sit there and go, okay, what is the reason? Like, why? This is the question in my mind. Like, why am I asking this, or why am I telling her this?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, and is it actually how how true is it really?
Yeah, we also have, as a parent at home, like our oldest daughter used like to read in the evenings in bed, like very late, like till 11,
Yeah.
12 in the night. So she was got way too not enough sleep, and then in the morning she was like had a horrible way of treating her sisters at breakfast, and it was really, the whole atmosphere was like horrible. And then as parents, we said, okay, what are we going to do with this? Should we
Mm.
forbid her to read? And said, well, that doesn't really work, because I used to do it myself when I was
Mhm.
young, and my wife as well. So that doesn't work. And that you get a lot of arguments and a lot of fights about that.
Mm.
And we said, okay, well, this is our house. We don't want this behavior at the breakfast table at all. So we told her, you can read as long as you want, but your behavior at breakfast is totally unacceptable to us. So either you change your behavior or you take your breakfast in your room. We
Mhm.
don't care, but this is going to stop.
Mhm.
So we put in a very clear boundary for her.
Mm.
Well, this can't happen. And then she flicked around the switch, and she was very pleasant and nice in the mornings.
Yeah.
That was it. But so
Yeah.
you put in like a strong boundary, and but you leave it to her how to deal with it and how to react to
Yeah.
it.
How to respond. Yeah. Peter, I've just realised we've hit 11 o'clock. That hour whizzed by, and it's been a
Yeah,
fantastically interesting conversation. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming on this morning, for celebrating the rights of children, and hopefully everyone who's watching this live or watches it recorded gets as much out of it as I did. So that was a really great conversation. Thank you, Peter. And I hope that the rest of you have, or you and the rest of the audience have a lovely Sunday. So thank you, and yeah, just hope everyone has a good day.
yeah. Well, it was a pleasure to do, and I probably can talk for about 24 hours about this.
Absolutely, me
But
too.
there's
It's
much
always
more.
the hardest thing when you've got limited time. So yeah, thank you so much, Peter.
Very nice to do. Okay, thank you very much.